Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's three prakim Rambam, Hilchos, Yibum, Chalitza, prakim Gimel, Dalid, and Hey. We are going to start with Pei Gimel. Pei Gimel is going to speak about the believability and or the proof that's needed regarding the existence of either a brother or of a son. Pei Gimel has 19 halachas beginning with Pei Aleph. Says the Rambam. If a person says Zebani, this person is my son. Don't forget, if someone has a son, then there's no yibum. Or I have sons, meaning here not the gender, male gender, but it means he has children. Person is believed, and thus, if he passes away, now that we know he has a son or sons, his wife will be exempt. And why do we give a man such believability? Because since if he wanted to, he would have been able to give his wife a get while he's alive. Don't forget that a person can give a get even without her consent. So we have this concept called the migu or mali l'shakir. Why would he lie if his intent is to free her from bibam and chalitza? He can give her a get. So therefore he has nemanos. Now, halacha beis. Amar, if a person says up until now, we have no idea that this guy has a brother. In other words, she was becheskas, that she's not zekuka liyibum. Or he says yeshli achin, and now his statement is going against the chazaka. I know that we have the same migu, mali l'shakir, because he could have given her a get, but here we want for the migu to go against a chazaka. That's the famous topic in the Gemara, which one is stronger than the other. Here, the Rambam paskins that no, that amigo is not believed if it's going against the chazaka. Because we do not believe. Now, if it was already known that he has brothers, in other words, the chazaka is that she is zekuka liyibum, and v'amar b'shas misasai. And what he's saying by his death is ein liyachim. Again, ein lanemon. Again, here is a migu against the chazak. So halacha beis is that he's trying to make her becheskas zekuka. He is not believed. Halacha gimel is that a migu is not believed against the chazak. It's already known that this person is his brother. A man is saying he's not my brother. Again, that's the halacha, because a migu is not believed against the chazaka, even though he could have given her a get, but he didn't. What happens if it's not known? If there's no chazaka that he has a brother, but the yotza olav koil, but there is a rumor that there are witnesses. Witnesses they're out there somewhere that can testify to such, and these witnesses about whom it's rumored that they know are in a different country. Even if he says while he's on his deathbed, and normally people on the deathbed, right, will not be saying something that's not true. He says, I have no brother, still, we have to have a suspicion. And we have to wait until the witnesses come. We know the names of the witnesses. Go after them or wait until they come and then inquire of them. Halacha dal. Misha zina im isha. A man had relations with a woman, not a couple, not a married couple. Whether this woman is a single woman, whether this woman is a eshes, and she is pregnant. And v'amar, and he says, this fetus is from me. And she says, yeah. In other words, she's saying, I only had relations with you. Even though such a statement will give that future born child the status of an heir regarding inheritance, whether that child will exempt the widow from yibum and chalitza. Why is that? Not because we don't believe him. We believe him. He's saying that he had relations with that woman. Yeah. But how do you know that there wasn't another man that had relations with that woman? We say, and therefore, and therefore, Now here we create a very challenging situation, meaning ula hachmir done and boy. Therefore, only chalitza may be performed and veloy misyabemes. Halacha hey. Nemon eit echad lo hoyed liyabama shemeis bailom. That one witness is believed to tell, to say to a woman that your husband passed away, as we learned in the previous chapters. On top of that, don't forget that a woman will also be very careful whether she's going to take a next step based on this testimony, because it's going to affect her. And if she wants, she trusts him, then we accept that her husband is not living, and she's going to go ahead and do yibum. Now, this is something that we never spoke about in Hilchos Gerushin regarding yibum, because don't forget that if her husband is alive, right, not only is she an Eishes, but she's having a relation with an erva of Eishes Achiv, or Shemeis Yivamam, right? We believe in A to say that what? That her husband, Shemeis Yivama, or Shenasa Labala Ben Lahatira Lazar. We even allow a witness to say that this man has a child, but she never knew that her husband has a child. Based on the testimony of one, we believe that the husband has a child, and therefore she doesn't have to do chalitza, even though we know there's a brother, not even l'chumra. She can marry someone else. And vafilu, an eved or an isha or a goy that are masiach l'fitumai, made either remisa sayavim, k'may shemei le'esha sis lahatira, k'may shemeyanu b'hilchas gerushin. Just like we learned in Hilchos Gerushin regarding a woman becoming, no longer married, but yes, a widow. We believe everyone other than the 5 women that are not believed. Here is the same. The chamesh hanoshim she'ein me'idos zu lezu shemeis ba'ila. Kach, similarly, ein me'idan lo shemeis yibama. The 5 women won't be believed to say that your husband died and therefore you're falling to yibum. V'din eidazu kedin oisa edus. The Rambam completely compares one to the other. We had this in Perek Beis, we had this in Perek Ches. If one witness says he died, the other witness says he didn't die. All of the rules that we had concerning whether she's a widow or not, same rules will be regarding whether she's falling liyibum in the scenario where her husband does not have a child and he has a brother. Halacha zay. Right, 2 widows. Now here's the key. Each widow married another brother. The women are sister-in-laws. They are not biologically related, but they are sister-in-laws because each one married a brother. None of these brothers had any children, which means either of the brothers who pass away, right, that widow will become zukuka to the brother-in-law. Now, one says Meis Bailey, and as we just learned, that a woman is believed to say Meis Bailey, even if that means that she's now going to fall and do yibum with the brother-in-law. The other one is also saying Meis Bailey. We just learned in Halacha Vav that even though even a woman is believed, but the 5 women that are not believed, one of the 5 are co-wives, right? Yevemta. Here you have these co-wives or potential co-wives, the Yevemta. Amazing. So they are believed for them not to be married. But one is not believed regarding the other. So zu asur mepnei bailo shel zu, zu asur mepnei bailo shel zu, mamish gavaldik. Each one is allowed to marry a zara. Why is she allowed to marry a zara? Because she's saying, my husband died. If her husband died, she's not married to her husband. Correct? What about, is she chayiv to do yibum? For that, there is no nemanos. Right? So each one is, but they are prohibited to marry the other person's husband. Wow. So it's like we believe them partially. What happens if one of them has a witness? And a witness, another man is believed. And he's saying that your husband died, right? And Zoy Sheyesh Lo Ha'ed, the one who has a witness that her husband died. Asura, Imedus be Surah. Why is that? Because how do you know that the brother-in-law died? If the brother-in-law is alive, she's chayv to marry the brother-in-law. The other wife is saying, my husband died. She's not nemenes, one yavama for the other. And she doesn't have a witness that her husband died. But the other man is died based on a witness. She's believed for herself. She's allowed. As long as we know from an aid that the other husband died, she's nemenes to say that her own husband died. So therefore, she's not married. She's allowed to go and marry out. Why did she not fall a yibum? Because there's an aid that is saying that the only brother also is no longer living. If there's no brother, then she's muteres l'shuk. Pasha. Halacha tes. Hayel zubanim ulu zubanim. Zu she'ein lo banim. Same case. Since if her brother-in-law is alive, she falls liyibum. How do we know the brother-in-law died? Because his wife said she died. So what? For her, she has no nemanos. Zu she'yesh lo banim mutaris. Because all we need to know is whether she's married or not. A woman is believed for herself to say that her husband died. Okay? Now, if there's another living brother, that other living brother will do yibum with both. Because you understand, each one is believed to say that her husband died for herself. And she's for sure a widow. There's a living brother here. Go do yibum with that person. If this yavam who married them died, in other words, we're going back to the case of halacha number Zayin.
Especially that their original husbands might be alive.
That's the point. Just because they already did yibum, it doesn't resolve that halachic interesting scenario where, again, a woman is believed to say concerning her not being an Eshes Ish, my husband died, but she's not nemen that her husband died to tell her sister-in-law, you have no one to do yibum with. Maybe he's alive, and therefore you have to do yibum, or you have to do chalitza with him. Nisyabnu v'nis garshu. But if, again, in this case, there was a third brother. Both of these women married the third brother. He now divorced them once he gave them a get. Because when you do yibum, and then you do a get, you're no longer married. That taka took away the entire zika. Now there's no zika. Even if the brothers are alive, there's no more zika. Right. Like we mentioned, for herself. And therefore, Vetina say she's allowed to get married, or as we learned in Allah, hey, right? If there is a brother-in-law, she can marry the brother. She's mechoyev actually, either to do yibum or chalitza. Nevertheless, now comes another nuance. If we know that she's a woman that she met a yavam, and she's testifying that my yavam died, here we don't believe her. Why? Even though we take a learned at the end of Perikut Gimel that it has to do with a person is not going to be made on something that's shasid lehigalos, and then they'll be caught in their lie. That is compounded with the fact that she knows the severity of what were to happen if she, as a married woman, marries someone else. That level of severity, Yataka don't have over here. It's not that severe. Eshes Ish is chayv kares, chayv misa. Chayv misa's beis. Mamzeder.
She has kids, they'll be mamzeder.
And here they won't. It's a chayv lav. They'll be pagumim. There won't be exactly. So because of that, she has no nemons. V'chein ein hayavam nemaloymar meis achi. That's another din chem. What happens? Can one brother say meis achi? You understand? So everyone is believed. We spoke about the 5 women that are not believed. Now we're learning something that we never mentioned before. Reuven and Shimon. Right? Reuven is married to Leah. Reuven is not here. Comes Shimon and he tells the Beis Din, my brother died. What would happen if his brother died? Then Shimon would do yibum, if he wants, with Leah. We don't believe him. Maybe he's lying that his brother died. Shema einav nasan ba. Oy gewalt. Now, a woman is not believed to say, my sister died. Also, when a man is married to a woman even if he divorces her, he cannot marry his sister. Right? Achois ishtoi. However, this is one of the ervas that we say that if the wife dies, then a man is allowed to marry her sister. So the same concept of Shema Ein Lav Masan Ba, the same fear over here. A woman is not allowed to say, my sister died, and therefore, based on that, to have the husband of her sister marry her. A man is not believed to say, similarly, my wife died, and because of that, to marry her sister. And then only because of hataras aguna. So we're putting things together. Eidechad nemon is based on the fact that it's something shasida legalis, which, by the way, you have in all of these cases. Anytime someone claims someone else died, if they show up, they'll be proven wrong. But that in itself is not enough. Together with the fact that there's a tremendous isur. Sometimes you don't have that. Together with the fact that we don't want the woman to be an aguna. So the moment there's no aguna sishum, you don't have to marry that man. You can marry all the other men. Because if you don't have all of these three factors together, then one aid will not be nemon. Halacha yud beis lefikach, and therefore, in other words, since we said that a woman is not believed to say that meis yivami, she goes and her husband and her husband's brother, and she comes back by herself and she says, the order is of a tantamount importance. My husband died. Now, what happens in that order? If when her husband died, the husband had a brother, she falls to Yibum. And now Meis Yivami, now we just said that a woman is not neman to say Meis Yivami, right? Because it's not an issue, it's not an issue of Eishes Ish. Right? So the second statement is questionable. Or if she says Meis Yivami first and then Meis Baili, and by the way, if that were to happen, then she's Muteres Lazar. In both cases, Hadezu ain't on the menace. Now, guys, remember one thing. She's not Nemenes to marry a Zar. She is Nemenes always to say that Meis Baili. In other words, she's Becheskas Zekuka Liyavam, but she's not a married woman to her husband. That if only she went with her husband, and she comes back and she says that Nitan Liyavam b'Medina Sayam v'Meis, no one even knew there's a Yavam. When she left, the chazaka was the husband has no brothers. She comes back and she says, listen, while we were away, my husband got a brother. No one knew about that before. And he died, right? This concept of Apesha As and Apesha Hitin. In either direction. Since we never knew that there was a Yavam, now we'll believe her. Woman is going overseas, just her and her husband, and her son. Here again, if she has a son, she doesn't fully yibum, and she comes back and she says, now guys, pay attention to the order. Meis Baili, if her husband died prior to the death of her son, what happens? She's not going to fully yibum, right? Because when the husband died, he had a son, even if he dies a minute later. And she says that was the statement. Meis Baili v'chagach meis b'ni. She's Nemenes. Why is she Nemenes? Step number one, a woman is believed to say Meis Baili. How do you know the Seder? I'll tell you how I know the Seder, because her statement is not going against the Chazak. Since when she left, she was Becheskas Eina Zekuka Liyavam. So her statement is just corroborating that. Shaharei Hoysa Becheskas Heter Lezod. Okay. Now, Omrav, she says, Meis B'ni, Fakert, she now wants to make herself permitted to the brother-in-law. Fakakach Meis Baili, we don't believe her. Fakert, any statement that she makes, like we said, maybe she wants to marry him, and she was Becheskas when she left, that she's not Zukuk Liyava. And in a menace lease, Yabim.
The key is that regardless of when the son dies, if a son in fact
no.
and then the husband is left with no children,
exactly. And as we learned, just we had an halacha Yud Aleph, maybe these two people like each other. So she's making a statement that's going against the previous chazaka. Here it could be She wants to marry him.
She can have a 21-year-old son.
Doesn't matter the age.
The kid dies. Now the husband's left with no sons.
Yeah. If she can have, God forbid, she can have 12 children. Right? Rabbi Yochanan had 10 sons. Yeah. If his children all passed away, if he had no descendants, no Ein Klach. Then when he passed away, if he predeceased his wife, then she falls the Yibum if he had a brother. Yeah. However, no, she's not off the hook. We believe her enough that if her son died prior to her husband, then she's zakuk yibum, so she has to do chalitza. But for her to do yibum, maybe they like each other, maybe they're not allowed to get married. Halach yudal. If only they left. Ubava Amra, and she notifies the Beis Din that while we were away, Nitan li Bey b'Medina Sayam, right? I had a son with my husband, and the son died, and then my husband died. Again, when they left, she was becheskas zukuka liyavu. Her statement is not going against the chazaka. However, same case, she left with her husband. She didn't have any children. Right? She comes back and she says that Nitan li bein b'Medina Sayam. And then what happened was, first my husband died, and then my son died. What would you argue? Let's believe her. Why would we believe her? Because, no, we don't believe her. Why is that? Because since we never knew she had a son, she was bechaska zekuka liyavam. We don't believe her to go against that. On the other hand, since she says that she had a son, so we're not going to allow her to do yibum. L'chumra, we're going to tell her you got to do chalitza. Very halacha. As we just mentioned, cases where because of her words, she has to do chalitza. We don't believe it fully to go against the chazaka, but she has to do chalitza. That's only bisha hoisa, besula, lakahuna, mitchilasa, which means prior to her marrying her husband, she was already a divorced woman. Don't forget, guys, husband dying doesn't make her psula lakuna, but that she already had that psula. So now, right, why do we say that because of her words, let her get chalitza? Prior to the marriage. Or for example, when she says, which means no one was there to let us know who died first. In the case of Yudalid, that's important then. In other words, if no one can know, so then we say, yeah, lets us, we believe her. But if there's a scenario where someone else was there who might come later and say that what she said is not true, which means she didn't even eat chalitza. Which means if the husband died before the son, she didn't even eat chalitza. Which means we're going to know that she's not a chalutza. We don't want to have a scenario. We don't allow her to do chalitza. We don't believe her at all because maybe she'll do chalitza. And then Eidim will come via Idush Hadavar Kamoisha Amra. And therefore, and therefore it's going to come out that the chalitza that was done based on her words was completely irrelevant. And what might she end up doing if prior to this marriage she was not psula likahuna? In such a scenario, they're going to tell you can even marry a kohen, and she'll marry a kohen. Problem is, people know about a chalitza even nowadays. It's a very rare phenomenon. It's very rare, and when it happens, people know that woman underwent a chalitza. We don't want to create a scenario. Now, there are going to be other cases later that such a possibility is so vague that we're not chayish to it. This is not such a vague scenario. When a woman is with her husband and a child, right, and both of them now are not living, which we don't know which one died first, let's call this 50-50. Could be one died first, could be the other one died first. This is a scenario that could happen. So if it would never become revealed, there's no downside. But if it's shaykh for it to be revealed later, so she went a chalitza. Now, if Adam come and they say, no, the husband died before the child, which means the chalitza was not necessary. The Beis Din will tell you can marry a kohen. If she was a woman that can marry a kohen. Yeah. And she's going to marry a kohen. People are going to know that she made a chalitza. People are going to think that a chalutza can marry a kohen. The Yadama people will think.
Based on that, we're saying don't do chalitza.
Yes. Now let me based on that, because Chavra, this Nemanus normally people.
Just tell them not to marry a kohen.
We don't want to do that. No, it's just to make it clear that in all of these cases, there is really, she has no Nemanus. When a woman is going against the chazaka, that's basically what we learned over here, right? When there's a migu, you're neman. Even a migu is not believed against a chazaka, right? That was halacha gimel today. A woman is not believed to testify against a chazaka. So if we don't believe her, we can say don't do chalitz. We're saying do chalitz. Since you're saying it, do chalitz, we don't do that. If a michshel can come out. For who and Yadeya, the people that observe the chalitza don't know that why did Beis Din Taka allow her to marry a kohen? Because Adam came. Lefikach. Now listen to this, Danny. Oh, 1 second. One second.
For certain
that my son died.
First.
So therefore,
she knows that she needs chalitza.
So therefore,
we're saying maybe that people other side.
Lefikach loitach chalitza cannot be done because of this michshel. The loitis yabim because she has no nemanus. Right, to do yibum, but you cannot say she's muteres lazar. Ela tishor becheskas zekuka kishayoitza acheyevayo edim. Now, guys, this nuance isn't it. How do you know whether there's edim or not? For that you'll have namanos. For that you'll have namanos. That's what the Rambam says. If she says no, only we were in the ma'ara. How do you know? We don't go that far. If based on what she's saying, there were other people, then let's further investigate. If based on what she's saying, there were no Aiden, which means we will never find out. If we'll never find out, then she does chalitza.
We learned many times that there's so many kulas for an aguna, and never saying that.
You were saying that we don't make a kulas for an aguna whenever you can resolve it. Make the effort to find out. Very halakha tazai. In other words, a man had more than one wife, right? So a woman went with her husband and with her co-wife. She went, Ubou va'amrula, two Eidim come. She didn't travel. She's here. Her husband and the co-wife went on the trip. They went to Vegas and she stayed here. And two witnesses come and they tell her, Meis Bailech, your husband died. Two Eidim. Now, Harezo loy tachaloitz v'loitzis yabim lo'olam ad sheyevada im yoda tzarasa lo'yelada. Obviously, they journeyed for a while. In other words, when her husband traveled, he traveled with a wife. A man who's married with a wife, he can have a child with her. So she doesn't know her status. So you have to inquire about the status. Now, why doesn't she do chalitza? What's the downside of doing chalitza? I get it that she can't do yibum, but what's the downside of her doing chalitza? Wait 9 months and then do chalitza. We'll see in a moment.
Came back?
Huh? Of course not. The tzara is not there. There's no communication there. The timoteres lazar al kol panim. Al kol panim means, as we would say today, mimanav like this. She'im yolda tzarasa. Guys, we already said that just because a woman is pregnant, it doesn't resolve the question because she can lose the fetus. Wait 9 months. We don't know anything. Let's say that they got pregnant. Let's say that after death, we say he can impregnate his wife when he's living. After death, wait 9 months. If indeed he got her pregnant and she gave birth, so then if she gave birth, that means her husband died with children. She's bachlal not zakuk l'yibum, right? I know that doing chalitza, you would say, what's the downside? She's not going to do yibum. If lo yolda, right? So then she's a kuka liyadam. She did chalitza. So what's the downside? The same fear. If there's a scenario where later we might discover that chalitza was not needed, inquire. She's going to do chalitza. If we discover later chalitza was not needed, don't forget a chalitza is only asura l'koyin, only midrabana. They're going to be very careful. But here they're going to tell her you muteres l'koyin. That yes. And it comes out that what you did was not even called a chalitza. And they're going to tell her now you may marry a kohen. Again, we're speaking here in Halacha Zion that prior to this case, she was muteres l'kohen. Any woman that prior to this marriage was already asura l'kohen, it's better for her. Because I don't care if she does a chalitza. Anyways, a kohen will never marry her because of a prior issue. But the yomer haroya shelo yoda ve'edom shuval shachalutza moteres lekohen. And the yod sheroya niseis lekohen al pi beis din. I saw the chalitza and I saw her marry a kohen. Lefikach, here again, we wait until 9 months. Again, we have to wait 9 months because a chalutza by a melberes is nothing. Wait until this mimanavsha. The co-wife is not pregnant. Either, God forbid, the fetus was, either she was never pregnant, okay, or she got pregnant and she lost the fetus. And even if she had a baby, then do it. But the tzara who was with the husband, she doesn't wait 9 months. But when a woman is with her husband, when he dies, how long does she have to wait prior to doing yibum or chalitza? 90 days, right? Because that's the din. Today, you're pregnant, when you make a pregnancy test, there, like we said yesterday, you wait 90 days. After 90 days, like we learned from Tamar, then we know whether she's pregnant or not. She'll know for sure. If she'll be pregnant, she won't do anything. If she won't be pregnant, then v'tachlo tzayt tisyavim. V'lo yisachush litzarasha shemedira acheres. Hoyel v'lo yihoya bala ima b'medina.
This wasn't one of the cases. Didn't we say that even if she's in prison and all these scenarios, she's supposed to wait 90 days?
Yes, that's what she always waits 90 days.
We're saying right now that the Sarah that wasn't with the husband doesn't need to wait 90 days.
In other words, what we're saying over here is that when you have two co-wives, do you have to worry that the other co-wife did chalitz? You're not there together. If you have that worry, then this woman cannot do chalitza either for the same fear. You get it? Because if these two women are not together, yibum and chalitza is only with one of the wives. If someone did chalitza with wife number one, say, then the chalitza that was done with wife number two is not a chalitza. And we are just saying we don't want for a chalitza to happen. If it could be, you'll find later, based on we'll find out it's not a chalitza, because then they'll tell you can marry a kohen. What you did was nothing. Here you don't have to have such a worry. This wife knows that the other wife cannot do anything, as we just learned over here. Her chalitza is going to be first. So she can do chalitza or yibum after 90 days without the worry that the other one did chalitza. No, after she has to wait 90 days. The one that was with the husband only has to do what every woman has to do. Wait 90 days. Now she knows she's not pregnant and she does yibum or chalitza. And what's the chiddush? That this co-wife, Danny, should not have a fear. Maybe the other one that's in another country, she found out that her husband died. Maybe she did yibum or chalitza, which means that if that were to be discovered, my chalitza was superfluous. That fear we don't have. Because the other one that's far away is not allowed to do yibum or chalitza.
What about if the wife that wasn't with the husband was already a surah l'kain?
Then maybe we do have to worry. That's what the Rambam is saying. Very good. Halacha Yud Zayin.
Whatever is in these cases, if she's a surah l'kain, it's actually works out better for her.
Oh yeah, Halacha Yud Zayin. Guys, a woman, husband's died, no children, no brother, so far as she knows, which means she can marry anyone. But she has a mother-in-law, which means that her father, guys, that's a paternal brother, but he's married. The father-in-law is married. So again, do you have to be chayish? Maybe unbeknownst to her, she has a brother. And therefore she has to wait. Now, guys, this is even the worst case scenario because, right? What are you going to do? You got to wait until you got to wait 13 years. Even though we learned that if he were to do a bia when he's 9, it has some level of effectiveness, but you don't do that. But you don't have to have such a worry. The Chazaka will say, and since as far as she knows, even though she has no children, but her husband has no children, the Chazaka is the husband has no brother, so now she's a widow. That's muteres l'shuk. A woman yet shmoli, a husband passed away, and as far as she knows, the husband has a son. What's the fear? Maybe the son died prior to the husband. You don't have to be chayish to that. So how great the whole chapter is like this. It's about chazakis and namanus. Halacha yudches. Yotza chamoisa muberes. When you're married, a woman is married to a man, right? The mother-in-law, guys, I know it has to be a paternal brother, but that's the case. And her father-in-law and mother-in-law traveled while the mother-in-law was pregnant. Don't forget if she'll have, if it will be a son, right? And then the husband will die, she'll be skukaliyav. And because maybe she gave birth to a male child prior to the death of the husband. So you have to make further investigations. Final halacha yutes. All right, she's here. Her husband and her son traveled. And two witnesses came back and said, on this order, your husband died. If that happened first, she's not zakuka liyavam. And then your b'nei. So based on the testimony, she was allowed to marry any other person. And Vinny says, and afterwards you find out that the Eidim testified falsely. Both of them died, but in the opposite order. Yeah. And if the opposite order means if the son died before the husband, then she's kukaliyava. So then Tate say she cannot stay in the second marriage. But guys, don't forget, like we keep on mentioning, that this woman is not an Eishasish, Staka Asura, but since there's no Isur Kaddish,
stay married.
Because she married someone be Isur, even though she did it because of the Eidim. Tate say, but Bahavlad is going to be kosher. There's no Kaddish here. Amrullah, if the Eidim told her, Meis B'neich, Vachakach Meis Bailach, and now what did she do? She did Yibum. Now, and then we find out Shchilvaya Dvarim. Now, 1 second. If Shchilvaya Dvarim, now Eishasach is the Isur Kaddish. So v'havlat shenoilad lifnei hashmua oila acher hashmua here Nebuch it's much worse. In other words, mamzeus, it's not her fault, but here there's an isur kaddish. Okay, Chavra Perek Dalet is going to deal about. It's a very big Perek, 35 halachas, but it's a very easy Perek. It's very long. The next Perek will be a lot more exciting. By then, hopefully, the coffee will kick in to use our seichel. This Perek is going to tell us how chalitza is done. We're going to learn about the difference between a chalitza psula and eina chalitza. Chalitza mutas, a mistaken chalitza. We'll see what effect does it have. We're going to learn here the nusach of a document of chalitza that they would write. We're going to learn here the nusach of a ksuba of a woman who's doing gibu. And therefore, the Rambam is also going to write the nusach of stama ksuba. All of these nuschayis will be in this chapter. This chapter has 35 halachas, beginning with halacha. I really think, I don't know if it was now or 7 years ago when we learned Yavamas and the Gemara, that there was online a video of a woman who got chalitza. And it was done with her consent. I don't know if you can find it now. There's a lot of work that has been done with this. Let's begin learning. Keitzat mitzvahs chalitza. How does it work? So here's the Seder. First of all, the Yavama, the woman has to go to the location of the man. Of course, if they both consent, then they both consent. But like, who has to go after who? Like when there's a din Torah. So there's rules. If they both consent to go anywhere, gesund to hate. The rule is that she goes to where he is, and they have to come to Dayanim. Vehem koiden loy, and first the Dayanim interact with the man, and the noisten loy eitza harigenes loy v'lo. Even though the Rambam paskins, like the Rabbanan, not like Abba Shol, theoretically, that there is a mitzvah of Yibum that precedes Chalitza, but every case is a case. In other words, you have to interact with a couple objectively to see if it's a shidduch. Now, one of the things that Rambam will mention is age. That's a good thing to remember. That's a din in Shulchan Aruch. Now, if a man marries a woman where there's a big age gap, no one should tell them, that's not something that is asur. But don't be mishadach people that are more than 10 years apart. That's a din in Shulchan Aruch. Because people in different decades have different needs. And when the husband and the wife have completely different needs, you are asking for trouble. Not that it's asur if they did it, but here the dayanim have to give a consent. You have to have this overlook. Now, first of all, they both consent. And it's a shidduch. Then you yatzin oisa liyabim. The imates of toiva lachalitz. There are times, even according to the Rabbanan, in this scenario, it's better to do chalitza. For example, going either she's very young and he's very old. That means guys more than 10 years apart. Or fakert, she's the older one and he's too young. So then Beis Din will give them advice, lachalitz. Now, guys, lachalitz doesn't mean that if they did yibum, the yibum will be effective. But first, the dayanim do a little bit of shidduch, what we call today shatchan work, to see if it's a shidduch. Now, halachically, if it's a shidduch, halacha base. Now, if they're going to establish that they indeed should do yibum, I'm sorry, if the dayanim established that they should do chalitz, because according to the Rambam, since we pass like the Rabbanan, there has to be a reason. They're going to say, no, the age gap is too much. They're very different hashkafas. A Lubavitcher family and a Litvischer family. Even though not nowadays it would work, but 50 years ago. Sometimes you see there's going to be disagreements the whole time. So you got to do chalitz. So you have to establish a place, right? What we want is,
She was married to his brother.
Yeah, but the brother became a Lubavitcher. 1 second. Here, the thing is like this, that we want for there to be a pirsum that chalitza happened. We want for people to know, you know how you make a pirsum? You say that in that location, chalitza is going to happen at that time. And you let people know about it. So it's pre-establishing a place prior makes the type of tumult that you want for there to, you want it to be a davar mufurs. And then, as it says, now, if there wasn't such a pre-judgment and they didn't establish a place, no matter what happened, if they did chalitza, it's kosher. But the Rambam is telling you, ideally, the dayanim should give their advice, and it should be known prior. Now, another step, if they're not like jumping the gun, we want for both of them to know how to read the psukim that they would have to read during the ceremony of the chalitz. And the tia yechoila likrois. As we're going to learn soon, that Rambam goes through all the details. You open up a Pashas Kiseitze. First, she's going to read the pasuk me'ein yavami lohakim loachiv shem b'Yisrael loy ava yabmi. My yavam doesn't want me, doesn't desire me. She reads that pasuk. She has to know how to read it. And he's giving you a detail. It's not only she has to be good in saying the ibra, but the words loy ava yabmi should be divided. That loy ava, he doesn't desire, should be said in one breath. And then yabmi. Why? Because if she says loy, she puts the comma there. Ava yabmi sounds like my yavam does desire me. So these little nuances we make sure, especially if she doesn't understand Lashon HaKodesh, that she knows how to read. And the same thing goes to him, right? He's going to read the pasuk loy chafatzti lekachta. We want to make sure that each one knows what they're saying. Now, by the way, if she was familiar with this pasuk, if when it came to the doing of the chalitza, and she read it in a way that it's mashma, the opposite, it's not ma'akev. We're going to see soon that post facto, even if no one read anything, it's not ma'akev. We're going to see different levels of chalitza. If the act did without anything else, it's going to be minimally effective. If chalitza and spitting happened, it's going to be a little bit more. You understand? There's different levels to chalitza. But prior, if she doesn't know how to read it properly, halacha 5. Another detail: the chalitza has to happen by day and not during the night. Chalitza has to happen in front of 3. In other words, it's a ma'aseh beis din. Now, these 3 are going to be telling them what psukim to read. So the 3 also have to be sheyoidim lahakrois kashuda. They know hakros means what I'm telling you, say, and you repeat. That's called lahakros. The dayanim have to be ready to do that. Now, of course, if that person is not knowledgeable on the verses, there's no need to be makra, but they have to be proficient enough to be makra. I want you to know that today, just like by a get, whoever witnessed it or God forbid underwent it, the hakris is everything is printed out, and you go into a beis din and you're giving that you're given the tzetlach, and you're pushing following everything from the script. It's a scripted interaction. Same thing will be with the chalitz. I was a convert. Whenever you have to have a beis din, if you remember, we learned this at the end of the whole Mishnah Torah, right? Sometimes they are for dinim mamanis, not for this. even if one is a get puzzle, and even if it's Ben Geb, his father, the Aviv Geb, or the Ima Yisrael is also not good. Another detail. Ideally, you should have 5 people. Why 5? Why not 3? Now, really, minimally 3. One of them has to be proficient. The other 2 can be Ami Ha'aretz. Halacha Vav. Ketzad Cholzin, Mino. Kavan, are you here? Please put up a picture. They bring a minol. Now, let me tell you something. Just the word minol is the biggest chiddush because the Gemara speaks about a sandal. And at some point, after the Chasimas Hashas, there are doubts that we have as to exactly what the sandal looks like. So there are certain features that we know from various Gemaras what a sandal is, and we incorporate it in the minol. So the one way of wording it is that the type of shoe that's used is as a crossbreed between a Talmudic sandal and between a minnow. One example will be is that the stitches that puts together the sole and the top part of it is visible on the outside. Because we know from the Gemara, that's a classic characteristic of a sandal. The Rambam doesn't write that over here. Let me see the picture that he put up. That picture, okay, is good enough. Leave it up here. Okay, there are better pictures, but good. Now, it has to be made out of leather. Sheyesh loy akev, I'll tell you one thing. Akev does not mean what heel normally means. I know the word akev means a heel. Today, when you make shoes, there's something called a counter. In the picture that he has up, a counter is the leather that's in the back of the shoe. In your akev area. It does not mean a heel underneath it. Fakert, it's like a sandal. When you wear a sandal today, it's open in the back. A strap, that's what we don't want. We don't want for there to be just a strap. You want for there to be leather. Even though, as we'll see, it's going to be a little bit like a boot as well, what we would call a boot. It goes up a bit, not too high. And we want for the straps to also go directly on the foot. So there's always going to be holes in the boot part of this minnow, as you can see here in the picture, to make sure that the strap touches the leg itself. The Rambam is not focusing on that. Akif means that even though there's going to be openings on the sides, but right closest to the sole of the foot, above, going up, there's going to be a leather. That's called akif. And when you sew the bottom and the top part together, it may not be sewed with pishtan. Yes, it's sewed together with leather straps. The life should be a mit. He has to put it on his right foot. The koishet itzuos al ragli, and he has to tie the itzuos al ragli means chevra, going up, what you would call in the boot area. But under, guys, there is a yerach. Yerach is the upper leg. Shoik is the bottom leg, right? It's not going to go on the shoik. It's lachatchila supposed to be under the shoik, but still going up. Means where your ankles are. It's going to go up on the ankle area. Now, that's enough for the picture. He and she stand on the base then. She's the first one that initiates, ideally, by saying the pasuk like we just mentioned. Me'en Yavami, right? Me'en Yavami lohakim lo'achav shem b'Yisrael loy ava kama. Loy ava kama. Yavmi b'charkach, and he confirms by saying anachanami. He's being moida by reading another pasuk. Loy chafatzti lakachta. I don't want her. And by the way, this can even be just for the record. Could be they would have wanted they initially had a havamina to get married. Based on, as we learned in Halacha Aleph, gave them an eitzah not to get married, but now they accepted it. After she says and he says, this is the ideal. Noyetz rag loy ba'aretz. He makes sure that he's not sitting. He's putting his foot on the ground. All right. So the sole is on the ground. She sits down. That's also when you, instead of bending down b'chlal for a man or for a woman, it's more tsanua. If you're doing something on the ground, you sit down. She sits down. Front of the basin, she extends her hand. We'll see soon. It doesn't have to be with her hand, but normally she'll use her hand. And she will untie the straps. And now she will remove the shoe, this minol, that we said is really as a co-breed, crossbreed minol sandal. should know that the removing of the shoe is the way she severs her connection with the deceased husband. And B'chlal al Pi Kabbalah, there's an inyan of, with the shoes. What do I do with the shoes? Even though I think, and even in Shulchan Aruch, that if someone passes away in shoes, no one should wear those shoes. But some people have a lot of things with shoes. The shoes is something that they don't donate; they get rid of. There's something about the shoe. So this removing of the shoe cuts. Umisha yeshamet roif ha'akev. Ha'akev, again, we explained. It's called the counter. Once the majority of the counter is removed from this man's foot, then hutra hayavam alazan. Yavam halachazai. I don't know. That's why I'll pick Kabbalah. And then she stands up. No, it's normally standing. She sat down because she has to remove his shoe. The Yorekas ba'aretz keneged panav, and she spits not in his face. She spits on the ground keneged panav, and it has to be enough spittle that the judges see that. Shemitzvas chalitza shiyu shneim oimdim, and kriya ubishas rekika, both while they're reading, and maybe I'm missing a word over here. I don't know, shuki, right? I have shiyu oimdim. Stama b'shas, right?
B'shas kriya or b'shas rekika.
You got it. It's okay. Just add in the word b'shas kriya, b'shas rekika, and b'tzrich ma'dianu malira yisarek with ayoyis amipia. B'acharkach, and then makrinla. She again has to say the following verse, and again, if she doesn't know how to say it, so they word by word say after us. Kacha yeyasel ish asher lo yibnu es beis achev. The nikra shmoi b'Yisrael beis chalutz hanoal. And halacha ches, everything should be said b'lashon hakodesh, because whenever the Torah uses the words kacha, kacha means b'lashon hazeh. And how do we conclude the ceremony? That chol hayoshim sham. Not only the dayanim, whoever is there witnessing this event, they will respond after she finishes beis chalutz hanoal, chalutz hanoal, chalutz hanoal, and they'll say it 3 times. Another din v'tzarech sheteschavin hayivama shetachlitz loy. She's having in mind, she's doing it for the mitzvah of chalitza. The Yischavin, who his kavanah is that she should remove his shoe, and everything that's done should be done lishman for the mitzvah of chalitza. Now, Hasuma cannot do chalitza because it says the yarka befanav. Befanav doesn't mean she spits in his face, but she spits in front of him, which implies that the man has to see that the spittle is being directed towards him. He can't see. Nimsa, now the Rambam is going to summarize again. Halacha 9, Nimsa say the chalitza kaf. First, kodehi tchila. The pasuk me'en yavami l'hakam l'achav shem b'Yisrael lo yava yavmi. Then he reads the pasuk lo chafatz l'kach. Then the act of chalitza is done. Then again she stands up and she spits. Then she says kocha ya'asal ish ashaliyun as beis achav v'nikra shmoi b'Yisrael beis chalutz hanoal. Interestingly, the Rambam doesn't say at the end of halacha tes that everyone responds chalutz hanoal 3 times. It's not in the same category. That's what others do. Here he's speaking about what they do. Halacha yud. Now, to say that is not essential, we're going to see in a moment that some of these steps are not essential. Ella im loy kara batchila, loy hi v'loy hu. Or she spit before the chalitza was done. Or they read the psukim, and then she spit. Then the chalitza is going to be kosher, as we'll see in a moment, Chavra. The most essential is the removing of the shoe. Yudal. Even though that rekika has some effect. So whenever you tell her to repeat the spitting, that will imply that that spitting prior is nothing. Any type of spitting already affects something, as the Rambam will go into details. Cholza bilvad, not reading, not even spitting. That is chalitza sekshena. Right? You never do chalitza twice to make it in the seder because there's chalitzas enough. The ain't tzarich that if both chalitza and kriya was done, even though no spitting was done, or chalitza and spitting was done, even though no reading was done, that the chalitza is kosher. Danny held up over here. Chalitza itself is a complete kosher thing. Rekika itself has some effectiveness. which means that no one else can do yibum with her. That even though de facto they did not do any reading, it's okay. Post facto, that's but if he or she are unable to speak, you can't do chalitza. Cannot do chalitza. And furthermore, if you did chalitza, the chalitza is possible. And I want you to know, I'm going to learn a lot about this more. Eina chalitza, like we had in the previous series. Eina get means it's nothing. Chalitza pasula means that on some level the chalitza was good. Enough, just give you one example, that the other brothers can no longer do yibum with her. Because don't forget, after chalitza, even though it's not on the Isra of Kaddis, we said, but she's the wife of your brother. It has some effectiveness, but it's not fully effective. She's not muteres lazar or muteres lashuk until she does a proper chalitza. Now, the Einam, Ilam, and an Alemes are not viewed like a Cheresh and a Chareshes. That by them, if they did chalitza, it's mamish nothing. Lefisha Cheresh v'Chareshes Einam b'nei das. So they're not shaykh to do chalitza. Ilam and an Alemes, they are only rabbinically, right? We invalidate their chalitza. And again, we'll see soon various nafkaminas. We know what it means, not chalitza. Not chalitza means it's as if there was no chalitza. We'll see what a chalitza pesula affects. Either just spitting or spitting and reading, but no chalitza. So here again, even though the actual removing of the shoe did not happen, it's like a chalitza psula. Just one example. None of the brothers can do yibum with her. Don't forget, before any chalitza was done, you can change your mind. Another brother, I'm doing yibum. Fine. But not anymore. If only kriya was done, not chalitza nor the kika, that's also nothing. Sheneman, as it says, kacha yei asha. You know what yei asha means? Doing. Spinning is a deed. Chalitza is a deed. Speaking is not called a deed. Shahamaisa, what's the maisa part of the ideal 3 steps? The 2 steps of chalitza and akika. Hu shemayel, avla kriya, only kriya, enu ma'akeves, ve'enu ma'eles at all. Halacha tezvav. Chotza v'rachel kavekara. They did all of the 3 steps, but they didn't do it standing. They were sitting, or they were laying on their sides. Oy shahaya suroich hana'al koshul al shoikai. Like the picture that he had up before, I know that it's what we would call maybe a boot, because it goes up the ankle area, but it's supposed to be ideally under the shoik. The shoik is the lower leg, and it was much taller, but at least it wasn't above the knee, it was under the knee. Very good. That's a great picture. And by the way, in this picture, whoever sees the picture, you'll see that in the bottom there's this white threads that are connecting the top part of the minal to the bottom part of the minal. That's one of the things that we do, because Chazal, when they speak about sandal, that's one of the definitions we know for sure about a sandal. That the stitches are not inside, the stitches are outside. Okay. That they don't know lahakrais, or a summa shecholza. In all of these cases, post facto, the chalitza is kosher. Halacha tezayim. What about cholza balayla? Or they made chalitza only in front of 2 people, or it was taka 3 people, but one of them is not halachically valid because he's a relative or he has another psul. The minol didn't only go on top of the shoik. The minol went all the way up to the yorech. You understand? It went above the knee. Or he untied the straps, even though she pulled off the shoe, or she untied the straps, but he pulled off the shoe, or there was a lack of kavanah by one of them, or a ketana that did chalitza to a gadol. In all of these cases of Tezayin, we don't say not a chalitza, we don't say it's kosher. It's called chalitza psula. And like just one afkamina with me, you have to do chalitza again. But what you affected something is that none of the brothers are allowed to do yibum. Im cholza b'fnei yachid. Forget about, two is like not having a basin. So they didn't know you have to go in front of a basin. She did chalitza, right? Beino lebeino ubalaylo. Yes, you have to do it again, but you did chalitza. It has some effect, and now we call it the chalitza psul. Aval chedesh shoyte v'koton shecholzu v'chein hachoylus lishi petura men hachalitza min hayibum ein chalitza at all. Halacha yudzay. Yavam sheragli hayemonas chatucha. He doesn't have the right foot. Ein hachoylus v'smoil. V'em cholza ma'al smoiloi chalitza psula. This is a big statement. In other words, my friends, if there's only one Yavam, basically, there's only one guy here, the only solution will be Yibum. Correct. If this one guy doesn't have or wait until he dies, he doesn't have a right. Like, if his foot is so disformed, that when you put it down, it's facing the opposite way or facing to the side, or he walks in a way like a ballerina. In other words, his foot is so deformed that his heel never touches the ground. Because like we said, he has to put his foot down. That's where he has to stand. Again, it does something, but it's not good enough. Now, what about the Yavama? The Yavama, we said, unties the shoelaces with her right hand, and she doesn't have to use a hand at all. So if, God forbid, she doesn't have any hand, she has no hands. But she has to untie the shoelaces. Fine, she can do it with her teeth. Now, what happens if cholza b'minol shel beged? The minol was made out of material. Eino chalitza at all. That doesn't have an arcade. It was like what we call a sandal. It didn't have this counter. Or if it was tied together with pishtan, the shoe was made out of goat's hair or out of sib, right? That inner bark of a palm tree, or a shalsham cork made out of wood. It was so big that he cannot walk in it, or it was so small that it didn't cover roiv lagloi. Or it was a minol panim, it was a torn shoe. In all of these cases, but the sandal shel eitz is covered with leather. Or the sole is leather. The sides were made out of goat's hair. See, it's already getting better. Right? Sandal shall smile ma'al raglei hayaminis. It was on his right foot, but it was a shoe made for the left foot. And by the way, to say this out, just like by a get, based in his makna to the husband, all of the get materials, here also, it's not that we expect this guy to have such a minnow, but based in who has the minnow will be makna it him. They'll give it to him. It didn't happen. It was too big, but it wasn't that big that he can't walk in it. But it was a half a size bigger. Maybe a size bigger, not more than that. It was small, but it did cover roiv ragloi. It was torn, but still these problems are all less. But still, here, if the sandal itself had soras in it. Now, within it, soras, we're going to learn, is a soras musgar or soras muchlet. Either one. Whether it's a sandal ha-musgar or ha-muchlet. Now, really, you should not have enough from it, right? But it could become mutter. Or it was shel avodah zara, meaning not it was used in the worship of. There's no heter from that. But shemanichin oisa v'raglei hatsura, that there was a certain image, and the image, the getchke had shoes, wore shoes. Right? It's called an accessory of an avodah zara, not a tikroivis avodah zara. Even though, of course, loy tachletz boy. But the im tachloitz, chalitzas ekshena. It's asur b'hana'ah. The answer is mitzvah lav lihanois nitnu. That's because we did not need to destroy it. Avol sandal that shall to krevis avodah zara, which is worse, or a sandal that belongs to people that live in an irani dachas, or a sandal that was pashut made to cover any part of tachrichin. Im cholzaboy chalitzas psula. because all of these things were not made at all to walk in it. It's ein loy toiras na'al. Now, when it comes to the minol that was used for the getchke, there halachically, if whoever has a chayenu can look on footnote 6, he writes that there's a halachic possibility for you to disconnect that accessory from the avodah zarah. Masha'inkin tekrevis avodah zarah, you have to burn it. That's why it's considered that's not even here. Or since it's not never going to be used, it doesn't have a toira of a minol. Halacha chafal. Kara minol me'al ragloi. Right, the Yavama, instead of pulling it off, she rips it off his foot. She burns it. That's a chevra woman. She burns it on his foot. You're right. She was wearing 2 shoes. She took off the outer shoe, but there's something underneath it. Even if afterwards she tore off the shoe underneath it. So the foot became revealed. In all of these cases, the halitz is psula. Yavama, now we'll go to the spittle. She ate certain foods that increased the person's spittle. She ate shum, or she ate a gargir, right, a mustard seed, and therefore, right, she's drooling. That's not nothing. She has to produce spittle without any external cause. So what happens if you try to gather the moisture in your mouth and blood comes out? She spits out blood, or blood was running off her mouth. Also, it's garnished. I'm sorry, if blood came out without her making that effort. The moment a person makes an effort to gather the moisture in the mouth, even if a person has a cut, so there is blood, but there's also spittle. She sucks out the wound and then she spits kasher. Another thing, if she spits, but it was very windy, it has to go for a moment on the height of his face. Prior to it getting there, it was blown away. How is that possible? Because, for example, she was very much taller than him. So when she's spitting, when the spittle left her mouth, it was above his face. Prior to it descending, it was blown away. So he says, klum. Now, guys, don't forget, we learned before that just chalitza without the kika does something. You're saying that the kika is not taken into account. What will be the consequence? Look above. Then the wind blew the spittle away. Another thing, what's the only essential for it to be considered spittle is that it goes keneged panav. Halacha chavdal. Another type of chalitza. It's called a mistaken chalitza, or a chalitza that was performed under a mistaken premise. It's psula. It's not a chalitza, but it's not kosher. Ketzad kegoin she'amru. They told this man, listen here, the guy didn't know anything. He wants to marry her, so she doesn't want, or her family didn't want. So they tell him, you want to do yibum? You know how you do yibum? They told him this. This is how you do yibum. Notice he did chalitza and he thought that doing this, that will affect the marriage. He was strict. It's a mitzvah to do chalitza, and there's no consequence. If afterwards, yibum is doing the act of bia, but prior to doing that, you have to do chalitza. Okay. Also, then it's not a chalitza ksheda, but it's not einay klum, it's chalitza psul. But if the mistake was by telling him, do chalitza, and if you do chalitza, then she'll give you 200 zuz. Then if you did chalitza, the chalitza is kosher. Or on any other condition, even if she never gave him the money, or if that condition was not met, then the chalitza is mamish kosher, because he did the act l'shem chalitza. He knew what the chalitza will do.
Trick him.
Well, you have to know the dinim, correct? So there's another rule that tanoim by chalitza are bechlal ineffective, and that's a good rule to remember. Tanoim are only effective by actions that could be done through a shliach. Anything that cannot be done through a shliach is something in which Tanoim don't help. We learn Tanoim from Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven. Over there, shlichus worked, because who led the Jewish people actually into the Holy Land was Yeshua. So therefore, the condition that was made is a valid condition. That's a good rule to remember. there aren't many areas in halacha in which you cannot send a shliach. But here, chalitza is something that he cannot send a shliach to represent him. You got to do it. Tanoim are einam oil, and we already learned in Hilchos Tanoim above that when a person makes a condition, if the condition doesn't go into effect, not that the whole thing doesn't work, the opposite. The conditions are ignored, and the action is valid. Halacha chafei. Just like we learned by a get, a person here also will be moiser moidala chalitza. Prior to the chalitza, he makes a notification. I'm about to undergo chalitza, but I'm being coerced into it. It's not. I don't accept it. That will invalidate the chalitza. Not eina chalitza, but chalitza psula. Lefikach ro l'dayanim loimer loy levatel amidah. Just like shoysam again. Lechatzu Yisrael. If he was coerced and they beat him, for example, until he did chalitza. If prior to this, Beis Din paskin, you got to do chalitza. In other words, they were fulfilling a psak din Beis Din, right? Then chalitza say ksheira, because, like the Rambam writes, he really wants to do what God wants. The im like kadin, but if they forced him shaloi kadin, kigoin shaloi kadin either means that Ayana made a mistake, or they never knew the halacha. Then again, it's not that the chalitza is nothing and nothing, but the chalitza is possible. Like we learned. So epis. Chalitza say epsula. But if the goyim did it shalaikadin, then it's mamish nothing. Mamish like by giving. Here the Rambam finally says, whenever we use the words not chalitz, eina chalitz, or leyasa klum, or eina klum, that means hadei hi ki ilu loy nechlot saloi. And what are the consequences? Consequence will be is loy nesru olav kiravisel, loy nifsulu min akohuna, umuteres liisyaben. Kol bakim shomanu chalitzasa psula. Number one, we didn't even mention this. Nesru olav kiravisel. That's a din that we learned before. The nifsulu min akohuna, even though she's not muteres lazar, but she already had a chalitz. The nesra ala achim, which means no one can do yibam to her. But on the other hand, the Now, Chav Zayin, Avrav in these says, guys, a woman had a chalitza that's psula, and she married another man. So here we say, while she's still married to this new husband, and they don't force a divorce. Halacha Chav Ches, Yevama shegadla beino achim. She was special living in that house. No, there's a chiddush here. We're not chayish that maybe cholza le'echad mehem beino lebeino. And we said that if you did chalitza not in front of a Beis Din, it's chalitza psula. Chalitza psula we just explained in halacha chavav at least affects that no one can do yibum. We're not chayish that. Because sometimes kids play around. Even though we don't know what their intent was. That's what happens when kids grow up together. One sibling can remove the shoe of the other sibling. Now nifsala. Because maybe it is chavda lechalitza. Chalitza psula. She needs another chalitza latira lizor, but she no longer can do yibum. Halacha chavtes, get chalitza. Now we begin. The document that records that a chalitza was done is not like the get that severs the marriage. No, the chalitza severs the zakika. The get is just a document. You know what it's like? I remember the Rambam said the same thing by Miyun, that the get Miyun is also just for her approval. Another rule, if they don't know the identity, they need to know it, they're not going to do chalitza. The guy that writes the get doesn't have to know them. He's just relying the fact that he witnessed based on doing it, he knows that this was like the couple. Lefika, since the dayanim have to be makir them, so Misha rose, even though the guy doesn't know anyone, Kais will not get chalitza. The afalpi that the writer she'ena makirim shazuhi ish is planning, and v'shezeh shechalotz was the brother. It doesn't matter because it was not in front of dayanim. And shaharei dayanim shechalotz b'faneim ikiru zeh chaltzom. Now let's go. Now we're going to have until the end of the chapter. Let's get moving. It's a big chapter, but we'll finish it. All of the nuscha is v'zehu nusach get chalitza shenhagu laha'am nusach get chalitza. The yoin pliny, comma. The yoin pliny means the day of the week. Remember that. Always. You begin with the day of the week. Kach bekach liyerach pliny, comma. Shnas kach bekach leminyan pliny. However you count. Leminyana di regelna lemimna be b'makim pliny. The Rambam is writing these words in Aramaic, which is very interesting because you don't write these words The year is however people wrote years on documents. Come on. Anachno dayane, we the judges, and not all of them are going to be signing. Actually, none of them need to sign. You only have to have two people signing. So they already write, some of us will be signed down there at the end of the document, because you don't want people to think there's only two signatories, that it wasn't done in front of three. It has to be done in front of three. So they're making it clear. It's laid down. But Moisaf, Tolasa, Kechado Havena, Yosef Mabedina. We were sitting together. Three were sitting like one. By the way, if there were five, they would write five. But there has to be at least three. Usalekas lekadamana ploinis bas ploini armas ploini. Who came in front of us? That and that woman, the widow of that and that man. And the iskarevas lekadmana, and in front of us also came Vuvra, a man. Who's this man? Chadi Achad, a certain man whose name is Pliny ben Pliny. Right? One of the brother-in-laws. The kat omnas lana Pliny da. That what? This guy tells us, Pliny ben Pliny do not achuya the Pliny mavuahu. I am the deceased paternal brother that she was married to, who he passed away. And it's interesting when you write passed away, today you write the Chleis, Olav Shalom, here they wrote, when someone passed away, and he left his life for the sages and for the entire Jewish people. As we have in Chagiga the story that even when the Malach HaMavos made a mistake, the Gemara says that the Shliach and took the wrong Miriam, so those extra years were given to the Rabbanim. So when you leave, the Shavek Chaya L'chol Chay, the Alter Rebbe quotes this lashon also, right? That we learn in the Geras Chav Zayin. Ubar ubaras yares umachsein ubar ubaras yares, and he did not leave a son or a daughter, right? Umachsein umaykim shon Yisrael lo shvak. Okay, so no kids. For hadein ploini achua chazeli abomi yosei. So and she falls to the yibum, right? And I was told by the Beis Din, like we learned before, that he's told the option. And they had to evaluate. Yibum or Chalitza, each Savi the Abayme Yossi Yabim. Either do Yibum. And the law, and if not, then Yatolai Kadamechain, Ragle the Yamina, then extend your right foot. Va'ashri Sane Ma'aragle V'irik Bankoi. And you, the woman, should go ahead, like we learned, and untie the shoe and spit. And the Ishte Moidan Hoi. The Beis Din has to write that we clarified the identity. In other words, like we learned before, they have to know, they have to be market. They have to write down that they clarified. We know that this guy is the brother of the deceased. He's the paternal brother. And he told us that, and we told him the same thing. If you want to do even the Eloi, then Atla lay Kadamana Raglach the Yamina, extend your right foot, the Tishrei Seinach, and she will untie and untake off the Shuma al Raglach, and she'll spit in front of you. Va'ani va'amad, and this guy, the brother-in-law, told the Beis Din, Leis ad not savi li'aboy meyasi. I don't want to do Yibum. So miyad akreinuha leploinis dena. When he said that, the woman said, and that's the real beginning, the pasuk me'en yavami lahakam la'acham shem Yisrael liyali abmi. And va'af lahoyi ploini akrele, and then we, the Beis Din, told the man to read the pasuk loichafatzi lekach. And after she read and he read the atla lei ragle di yamina, and after he extended his foot first, ushros seinem al ragle, right? She removed the shoe, and then the rakas ba'anpoi, she spit in front of his face a spittle. The itachse lana mipuma alada. We saw, right? We saw it going from her mouth to the ground. Vesuv, and afterwards, we the Beis Din told her to read the final pasuk. Kacha ya'asal ish asher livna as beis achid v'nikra shmei b'Yisrael beis chalutz hanol. And then they document that we also did the correcting afterwards by saying 3 times chalutz hanol. Va'anachna dayoni and v'chol da'hava yosvin kadama enyona basra. We said chalutz hanol, chalutz hanol, chalutz hanol tolas azimne. Then the document is not done yet. And after this was performed, now we are declaring that Sheiruna Leploinis Das Lamahach. This woman is now permitted Lihis Nasba to get married. To whoever she chooses. And the Enesh Layimcha Biyidei. No one can make a protest. Min Yom Dinana La'alam. Uba'as Minyana Ploinis the Gita the Chalitzasada. And the chasavna, v'chasamna, v'yahavnule, l'zochu, kedas, Moshe v'Yisrael. Halacha lamadal. Either all of shloish. 3 people will sign, or really only 2 people of the 3 will sign. Or, b'chlal, the dayanim don't have to be the signatories. And they don't even have to be the ones that know her. They're just documenting that the judges know them. Not to sign, but to testify. Goes another detail. How for the dayanim to determine who is who, they can rely on edus ever the isha. We don't believe a Ishan and Eved. Why do we believe them over here? And even though it's the same, but it's not the same. Because we already had today in Perek Gimel that it's not the same. How is it not the same? Because we said it's not just because it's Milsa David and Ligolis, but it's also because there's an Isur of Erva here. If she would be a Eshes here, even if what they're saying is not true, and therefore she did the chalitza with the wrong guy, and she marries out, she's not an Eshes Ish. Which is why she's not Nemenes Leiman Meis Yavami. But we believe these separate people. Now, what happens if Yibum will be done? Now the Rambam is going to begin with writing the Nusach. This is not the normal ksuba, guys. This is a ksuba that a man is writing for his Yavama.
Is that way if they do a minor?
Yeah, Maimer. Now when the Rabbi you do Maimer, and then you're going to do Nesunyan, and you're going to write a ksuba, you're going to do Sheva Brachas. So this is the Nusach of the ksuba. Yoim pleni kach v'kach liyerach pleni. Shnas kach v'kach leminyan pleni deminyanim. The regilna lemimah b'mavakim pleni. Ich pleni ben pleni. Also lekadmona v'chein amar lana. Ochi the min abba shchei, my paternal brother passed away, and his life was left to the sages and to the rest of the Yid. Ubar ubras umayris umachsin umaykin shom Yisrael. He left no descendant. Shema hates, but he did leave a woman, this wife, the Shemei, her name is Plenis Bas Pleni, and therefore b'chazi li. By title law, she's fit for me. Liyaboimi, Yosa, as it says in the Sefer Oiraisa de Moshe, that Yavama Yavayala, and she consented. Utzvias, that's called consent. Tzvi for a man, utzvias for a woman. Tzvias ploin is da, and the isyap mas pleni bar pleni Yavama loik mashma be Yisrael kedachsiva hoya v'cheresh atel yakom Moshe achav v'ameis v'loy machashma be Yisrael. And the chasav le pleni Yavama le pleni sivim. Here we go, writing a. So now you would say she's a Ba'ula. Yes, but if she married the brother initially as a Psula, like we mentioned before, that even without writing it, then all the original Chiyuv continues. So therefore, the Kesev is Zuzan Masan. But he's writing, why Masan? The Chazi law, the Habi Ksivim B'Ksuvasi, the Ksivim B'Ela Kadma, it's the 200 Zuz that the original marriage obligated for her. And now, if this current husband wants to add more money, and if she brings in the Nedunya, they record it again. So now, 1 second. So what is the typhus of Ksuba? So Lamed Gimel will be the Rambam's Ksuba. I know that the Ksubas that we have some nuance difference, but this is the Nusach of the standard Ksuba that you have for all marriages. What's the typhus of Ksuba? B'yoim pleni, etc. Ich pleni ben plenis, avla plenis, psulta kalsa, if she's taka psulta, heavily into Kedas Moshe Yisrael. But no, the memra de Shemaya. See, we don't have these words. The memra Shemaya. Eflach v'ayaked v'asoivar v'ezen v'afanis v'achasei yosichi kelchas guvin yodoin. The polchen v'ayaked v'moisvin v'zonin v'afanisin v'achasin last neshein v'kshoik. And v'ahavna lichi muhurta b'sulaichi kesav zuzi masan. And then we clarify what's masan. Remember, we learned that there was 2 coinages. Some of them were pure silver, and some of them were 7 points copper, and the 8th was silver. The latter is the 200, which really means that the 200 is really only 25 pure silver. They wrote it down. Then you add that she accepted. She accepted all that, and into. If the guy is adding, so they're going to write that he wanted on his own, and he added more to Sefes. And then they also write down all of the Nedunya that she brings in, if she brings in. For Don Nedunya, the Hanolas lay kach v'kach. Hakol neskabel chasim zeh ubali yodei the nasas b'reshusay the zakav hakoil al atzmai like a milva ureshu, like a loan or a debt. Because even though she didn't bring in many of the things like the ikar ksuba, she didn't bring any or Tosefes, but it's like all of it is like a loan and a debt. The kacham lana chasna danon achrayis ksuba da kula, both the ikar unadunya and the Tosefes. Interesting, they wrote the Nadunya before the Tosefes here. Im sha'ar tnai ksuba kabel salai al yarte basroi al kol shvar arag nichsen v'kanyonim the islit chois shemaya. And the chiddush is he's even being makabel and achrayis on those things that he's going to acquire. Either mekarka or metaltala. Guys, remember metaltala is from Takanas Hagoinim. So he has another detail in these metaltalan that I will and metaltalan that I will acquire agav karka. All of what I will own. Kula on yohin achrein varvoin l'ksuba da. Kula the iker the nadunya the Tosefes lispara min hoin b'chayei u'b'aser moisi. What do we write today in the Ksuba? B'chaye u'basar chaye. I think that's what we write. Al tiftach peh. Afilu migalima da kisfoi, even from the shirt of my back. The konino mi ploini the nun. The kinyan is made with the chasam because it's his obligation. Al kaman the ksiv umafarish le'el kinyan shalem, and they write the loik asmachta the loik atuvs in the study. Ela kachaymer chayze kol shit v'kesoyis anagoyis v'bes Yisrael. The chayken ukatikon Rabbi Zajac zechraneim levracha. The chasamno al stark suba zeh bisman aniska lamayla b'hakel barir sharir v'kain. Halacha lamadalid im hois ksubas almana. So you begin by writing ploinis armalta. If it's a ksuba of a woman that was previously divorced, you write ploinis hagerusha. Today, you know what you write? How do you say that in Aramaic? You write it matrachta. But you have to write it in the ksuba. Why do you have to write it in the ksuba? Because this marriage can end by him passing away. All you will know later is that she's an almana. To make sure a kohen doesn't marry her, you already write in the ksuba now. Now, when it comes to the latter, I mean, she was already previous. She's a psula. She's not a psula. So the choisev, the yehevna lechim mohiraychi kesav only zuzah meya, half. And since the Rambam also writes how much is it in pure silver, so before it was 25. What's half of 25? 12 and a half. The inon mizuzi kaspa tava treset zuzi upalga zuza the chazul. Final halacha lamed hey, shekoisvin get yevamin, which is called get chalitza, or ksubas yevamin. So the Rambam is writing a big statement that is a very difficult to understand. The Rambam writes misarteit mokim apsukim. Whenever you are writing psukim in the document, you have to indent sirtut lines, because the Rambam writes over here whenever you are copying words of scripture, even if it's only 3 words or more, you have to do sirtut. What's the problem, guys? The Rambam in Hilchos Tefillin, Perek Zayin, Halacha Zayin, writes befedish, muter lichtoiv shalish tevois b'lei sirtut. Only if it's more than 3 tevois, it's also. Happens to be, guys, that you're writing more than 3 words. So listen, if it's a mistake in the girsa, it's a mistake in the girsa, but that's something that everyone is speaking about over here. Another thing, the Yavama Shechalsa Mutaris Lihinase B'Yoim Chalitzasa. Because the rule is you only do Chalitza until 90 days. Unlike a woman, let's say, that gets divorced, then she begins to wait 90 days. A woman who becomes a widow begins to wait 90 days. By a Chalitza, she gets married immediately because the Chalitza will never be done before 90 days. Now, I know it's 10 to 7. Perikei not only has 30 halachas, but you really have to focus the chap, this Perikei. The general is easy. The sikum is easy. We're going to be learning the terms maimer kosher, maimer pasal. Be'ila kshera, be'ila psula. Chalitza mu'ula, there's a superior chalitza, there's an inferior chalitza. Now, simple can be simple. You know, if you do a chalitza pchusa, then make a chalitza mu'ula. The beauty of this chapter, it's going to be mamash like a puzzle. What happens if they did one step and then they did something else after that step? What happens if one brother did mimer, the other brother did mimer? What happens if you give a woman a get prior to doing anything? We're going to be learning about different steps that were taken, how effective is one, and all of the various scenarios and complications that they will cause. Let's begin from the beginning. Halacha Aleph says the Rambam. Right, again, we're going to maimer acher get acher maimer, get acher get. It's going to be freilach here. Halacha Aleph. Hayavama shenasam hayavim get krisos. Guys, you have to remember these rules because everything else will just be putting together these rules. If Yavama gives a yavam a get, God didn't say give a get. God says either do yibum or do chalitza. You know something? The get has some effectiveness. Psala means he may no longer marry her. Not only may he not marry her, but upasal es tzoraseh olav. None of the co-wives, even though he only gave a get to one of the wives, he cannot marry any of the co-wives, nor can any of the brothers do yibum. Guys, remember this. No, it's giving of a get which doesn't sever. You know what severs? Chalitza. You know what finalizes, concretizes yibum? Get has that negative effect.
He's married to her in some fashion.
There's a zikah, yeah. Now, is this a biblical rule? No. But why did the Chachamim say it? You know why they said it? Because the whole get shepoisel ishta min hakohuna, poisel yevimtoi min hayibum. Remember, there are certain divorces, right, that we say are completely ineffective. She's not muteres. She'll need chalitza, but the get midrabanan will be effective enough. Remember this. You give a get, she can no longer do yibum with none of the brothers. Right, halacha base. Hamaimer, we learned before about Maimer, which is the rabbinic pre-step to yibum. Hamaimer, afal pisha eino kohen bayivam kinyan gamor, and therefore be'ena nasis bayeshes gemura. You know what Maimer does? Maimer, which is a rabbinic shmuli, affects a bond that if you want to undo a Maimer, you know what you need? A get. Tzrich a get. But what did we learn in halacha aleph?
Chalitza.
You need chalitza. So if a guy does Maimer and he gives a get, he took a step closer rabbinically. He undid that step, but the intaider remains. In other words, guys, yesh chalitza achar Maimer. Not only yesh chalitza achar Maimer, you need chalitza after Maimer, but chalitza won't be enough. Because if you did Maimer, what do you need if you want to sever anything? Take away all these documents. We don't need this right now. What you need is, you need a get and then chalitza. Now, what will be the ideal? Now to have an act of be'ilah, but he doesn't want to do it anymore. You have to write a get. You can't just do chalitza anymore. Right? Aval haget only has the power in halacha aleph poiselis liyibum ve'enamatin lezon. And v'hamayim eno kind of baking and gomer kabeilo. So again, if a guy gives his yavama a maimer and they don't want to finalize their union, two things have to happen. You have to first give a get to nullify the maimer, and then you have to do an act of chalitza. Halacha dalit, guys, here it's easy. It's going to get fun soon. Nasan maimer liyavimtoi, v'chaz of nasan get lamamaroi. So we say masha asa harei bitloi. Hutara means, guys, can he do yibum with her? Yes. In other words, what the get did was the get took away the maimer. After chalitza, you can't marry her. If you begin by giving her a get, Rambam writes halacha aleph, right? Then you no longer can marry her. Here the Rambam is saying, if you gave maimer and you gave a get, then this guy can do yibum with her. Says the Rambam, but I think it's this get is less effective because it was for something that you made, but not for you. This the Rambam thinks, that means it's not in the Gemara. You have to remember this detail. You see that nuance already? So when you give a get, no one can do yibum. If you gave maimer and then you gave a get, the Rambam writes, the other brothers can do yibum. Halacha nasan get lizikasi, v'loy lemamorei. Now, like we said, halacha aleph, sala olav al sharo achim kamei shabiyanu. No, if the guy gave a get, he said, "I'm giving you the get, not for the maimer, for the get for the zika."
He had already given her maimer.
He already gave her maimer, but he's saying this get. Very good. So now he has to give her another get. And then chalitza latira l'sar. Halacha vav. Or there's ignorance here. Nothing was done prior. He did maimer. Ella. Whenever you hear the words maimer kosher means that's all it happened. Maimer. It's a maimer that will allow them to consummate the yibum. But if, right, prior to him giving her a maimer, someone gave her a get, as we learned in Halacha Aleph, right? Then he's not allowed to do yibum. If he's not allowed to do yibum, then what will the maimer do? We'll see in a moment, right? Or if chalitza was done, then no one is mamash allowed to marry none of the brothers. More which means that they did the yibum, whether he did it or whether another brother had bia with another co-wife. Or maimer was given, and after the maimer, guys, how told this get was given, after the maimer chalitza was done, another. He did bi'ilo. Oy nasan maimer acher litzaras. Means he gave maimer to one wife, and now he gave maimer to another wife, the second maimer. Or ba'ala. Now this maimer is called maimer pasul. Oh, it's the only time we're going to use maimer kasher is the beginning of Allah Chavav. All the other cases, many different cases, we'll see the effectiveness of the maimer, but it's maimer psul. We're just beginning. Halacha zayin. Ketzer. Let's apply this. That nasan get. First step was halacha aleph. Someone gave one of the co-wives a get. Or more than that, someone did chalitza liyavimtoi. And now, b'chazar b'nasan maimer law. Oy l'tzarasa. Beinu bein achiv. Oy shaba al yavimtoi. And after that, ba'al yavimtoi, or he gave her a maimer, and then he gave another co-wife another maimer. So we're focusing on the maimer after the bia or the maimer after the maimer, whether he gave the second maimer or another brother gave it. The chazar achiv and asan la maimer acher, or another brother had beila with you. Look at this one case. He gives maimer. Another brother wants to marry her, so he does an act of bia. Don't forget that maimer doesn't finalize it. That bia on a biblical level did it, so that retroactively now will define what his maimer does. All of these cases, this maimer is called a maimer pasul. Whether bein ha-maimer rishon, bein ha-maimer achar. Now, what do you do now that Rambam didn't say yet? But just remember that will be the cases of a maimer that's pasul, not einoi maimer. Halacha ches. Dimsas lamed shehamaimer ben shekad mi maimer acher. Oy get. Oy chalitza. Oy beila. Ben shekad ma maimer la'echad me'elu. Harei ze maimer pasul. Chutz. When is an a maimer kosher? Is that one of the brothers, only gave maimer to one of the co-wives, or to the wife, ubal labalas a maimer. That's the only halachically valid maimer. Halacha nine. Habeila. Shaboyel hayavim es yivim tetchila, or after the maimer. V'loy kadma davar acher. It's not like there was a maimer kosher and then some chacham made a maimer pasul and then he did bia. Maimer and bia, or just bia. That's the only time that we'll use the term bi'ila ksheda. But the im kadama maimer me'echav. Can you imagine? So Reuven passes away. Shimon gives maimer, like we just mentioned, and Levi does bi'ila. We're going to focus, how do we call that be'ila? Oh, I get. In all of these cases, the term that we'll use now for the act of bia is be'ila psul. What will be the halacha? We'll see soon. Halacha yud. Now we're going to use the terms chalitza mu'ula, superior chalitza versus inferior chalitza. If one brother, the first thing that was done was chalitza, That's chalitza ma'ula, superior chalitza. But if prior to the chalitza a get was given, if prior to the chalitza maimer was given, then we're going to call that chalitza a chalitza pechusa, not a chalitza, but a inferior chalitza. Yud Aleph. Yevamois rabois habois mibayis echad. Notice the husband was married to many wives at the same time. And when a bilik sheda happened, or nechlotza chalitza mu'ula, that is the proper way of either finalizing ibum or finalizing the severance, the cutting off. Hutru hakoil and v'nestalka zika sa'ivam aleim. Now the im niv'ala achas mehen be'ila psula or nitan lamaymer pasul. What does be'ila psula accomplish? What does maimer pasul accomplish? Nesru kulam liyibum. Furthermore, how do you undo it now? Not only by chalitza. Tzricha get zushin of Allah. You need a get for the bia. You need a get for the maimer. And also, v'tzricha achas me'am chalitza l'tirum l'zor. She'ein zika sayiva mistalekas be'ila psula. To say that if you made a be'ila psula, Danny, and then you gave a get, hakol short of a kain. No. Only if the be'ila was a be'ila mu'ula, then now that the yibum is done, then you all you need is a get.
What made the be'ila pesula, Rabbi? What made the be'ila pesula?
We just learned all the cases that we spoke about. I think it was in Tess. All the cases in Tess. Halacha yud beis. Nechlotza achas mehen chalitza pechusa. You know what that accomplishes? That woman who got the chalitza pechusa hutra li nasi l'zor. Oi, hutra li nasi l'zor zu. Okay, she can marry this. But who can marry the zar? Only the one that got chalitza. It's when you have a chalitza mu'ula. You know what it does? That if there are other co-wives, everyone, not here, only her. Or if all of the other brothers, if there are more brothers, all of them will repeat the same chalitza pechusa to that same one, that will also affect everyone. She'ein chalitza pechusa misalekes zikas hayim mibayzeh ad shetachzet al kol ha'achim or ad shetachleitz kol achas mehem. Halacha yud gimel. Kol yivam shenav yivam. Right? If they have a marital relation, bein be'ila ksheda, bein be'ila psula, afilu ba'ala achar shechalatz la, bein hu bein achiv, bein l'shem ishus, bein l'shem yavmos. In other words, guys, the second be'ila, remember, there is no erva here. You know what the problem is if there's no erva? The second be'ila affects kedushin, because kedushin is chal, even if you're violating this isur of marrying your brother's wife, but it's no longer the erva. Bein hu bein achiv, that be'ila will affect the kedushin. Then harezu tzricha get, because shahadei nases eishes ish ba be'ila, because of the rule that kedushin is toivin b'chayav yasei, which is the case over here.
First had a relationship with one woman and then his sister,
yeah,
her co-wife.
Yes.
So he had with both.
Yes.
The first one is one.
First one is the one exactly.
The second one is just Nilas.
That's right, but it's kedushin. But no. Since the isur is no longer kares, so it's kedushin toivsin. So to separate that, he's not allowed to be with her. You need to get
From the second one.
Yes. Whenever Yibam was given a maimer, bein maimer kashim maimer pasul, hanezu tzricha get because of the maimer k'may shebiyarnu, and only afterwards v'achakach yasur isur hamaymer. Halacha yudal kfar beyanu. Guys, we didn't even begin yet. We're just giving the rules for every case for itself. Then we're going to put it all together. Kfar beyanu shaget eino doy chayev b'matchiyah gemura. Like we began this chapter, and v'chein hamaymer eino koina b'kinyan gam. Abel habeila. Koine king and gomel, and only the chalitza is doichois of the chiyah gemura. Lefikach, guys, get achad get by Yavama. or Maimer Achar Maimer will have some effectiveness, as the Rambam will give cases. As the Rambam will give cases in Halacha Tezvav. Avol Be'ila Achar Be'ila Ba. Danny Ba means to the exclusion of what we just learned. You do Be'ila with one wife, then you do Be'ila with another co-wife. The second Be'ila will also be effective. But if you're doing it in the same one, if a Chalitza Achar Chalitza Eino Achreinim Elas Klum, the Chen Get or Chalitza Achar HaBe'ila Eino Klum. Halacha Tezvav Keitzad. Let's give cases for everything we just mentioned in Yudalid. Yavam Shenosam Get Levi Vintoi. And then this Chacham went ahead and he gave a get to Tzarasa. So what do we say? We say is that the second get is something. What does something mean? Something means that now Asur B'Krei Vashteyan V'chein Shnei Yevamim, two brothers, Shenasnu Shnei Gittin Liyevama Achazeh Achazeh. She's like a gerusha to both of them, and therefore both of them may not marry her relatives. Now, a get is not good enough. You need to have a chalitza. Only one of them has to do a chalitza. Get the yevimtoi. And after you gave a get to your yevama, which doesn't completely sever, the nasan achid get litzarasa. Again, kol echad asu b'kroi v'zu shenasan la get. V'chein im nasnu maimer acha maimer in all of the cases that we mentioned. However, avol hayavam shechalitz liyevimtoi, which means what chevre? That's it. There's no more yibum here. There's no zika. The chazar, he gave chalitza l'tzaras. That action is nothing. Ben hu ben achit, or ben shnei yavamim shechaltzu zachar zeh, and we know which one gave first. Leave to the same chalitza achreina klum, and therefore what? For example, the one who did the second chalitza is not prohibited to marry the relatives of this chalutzasa. It's not his chalutzasa. It's like you go to the street and do chalitza. Another case, which means you made yibum. Now the chazar ben hu ben achiv and gave her chalitza. Chalitza after bia is not effective, and therefore the isurim that we're saying that you cannot marry kroi boys, your chalutza does not apply. After the be'ilah. The Nosan get law, guys, not the husband. Guys, if Shimon did Bia, of course Shimon has to give her a get. That's the only way out if they're going to get divorced. But Levi gave her a get. You understand? After she did Bia with Shimon.
Yeah.
So that's nothing. No, that's nothing. Ain't a klum. The Chazar Achiv, the Nosan, La Maimar or Baal. All after one brother did Be'ila, also they did nothing. Because and now she's a married woman. But hold on, after Shimon did Bia, means evil, Nasan, the brother, add that word and everything will become clear, gave Maimed the Tzarasa. Maimed is Kedushin. One second, Kedushin. Or he had Bia with a co-wife, which could be an act of Kedushin, which should not be done, but there's no Isur Kadis. Then the other marriage will need a get because Kedushin is twice.
Kedushin is Chalak, Ishes after.
After, because the Isur of Erva goes off, even though there's a new mitzvah say. Yes.
Once there was a possibility.
To do Yibum, that's it. Halacha Yud Zayin. Guys, we're almost there. Shnei Yevamim, I mean, now we're almost putting all the pieces together. It's not that difficult. You just have to chazan it many times to remember every single rule. Two Yevamim, sheyibmu shtei Yevamis habois mabayisach. Now, what's the rule, guys? Only the first one was effective. We don't know who did Yibum first. So what do? Shneim yitziu beget, and the yutru lazarim basurim liyevamim. Lefikach, therefore, because of that, the Reuven that lives in Yerushalayim, Reuven has two wives, right? One of his wives, this is a very happily married man. He has two wives. He lives in Yerushalayim. One wife lives in Akoi, and one wife lives in Sor. No one is fighting. Everyone lives in a different city. And Shimon, his brother, lives in Akoi. Levi, his brother, lives in Sur. I mean, this is a great case. There's no communication the way you have today. They both of the brothers find out that Reuven passed away. So, what happens? So, Hadin Noisen, Shelo Yeyabim Echad Mehem. None of them should do Yibum Ache Yedema also Achiv. You know what the problem is? The problem is because Shema called them the Yibim. And what happens then? What did we just learn? If you're going to do Yibum with the other wife,
And he's usher to the.
1 second, then he's usher. It's the worst. Not only is he usher, but Kedusha is Toifus.
Right.
And he has to give her a get. And we don't know. If one of them did it first, we don't tell him, oh, maybe your brother did it before you. Unless we know that you're Achav Yibam Tchila. Now, guys, there's a big chiddush here. I'll tell you what the chiddush is. If you remember, we learned in the last chapter that sometimes you don't allow chalitza if eventually it will be discovered that the chalitza was nothing and she's going to marry a kohen. What's the far-fetched case that Chazal were not afraid here? Maybe Shimon did chalitza, and then Levi did chalitza to the other wife. So that wife is a chalutza now. Then we're going to discover that Shimon gave chalitza first, which means Levi's chalitza was garnished because ein achar chalitza klum. Then she's going to marry a kohen. So such a case is so far-fetched that we don't make the gzeira. Let's go back. Then it's not as bad as, because at least here, if we're going to find that out, we're going to force him to give again. Okay, fine. Halacha Yudches. Yavam Katan.
I'm talking about the one that did chalitza. She did chalitza, but she didn't realize the co-wife already did yibum. So that one's a good yibum. Her chalitza
Same thing. Was nothing. Same thing. Very good. Very good. So we're not. Don't do it. But if you did it, we're good. Halacha Yudches. Yavam Katan. Meaning, guys, if he's under 9, then his act is not called an act of bia, but he's ben tejamech. So, guys, even though we learned that if he has cohabitation with her, it does something. It doesn't do a bia gemura for them to be a yavam. It's not a yibum. It's like a mimer. And all of the rules we learned now goes to that. The yasai k'mimer min agadol because she'ein a kohen king in gamer. U'mimer ben teisha shana v'yemecha im nasan itchila. So everything we learned above. This minor made a mimer. Made bia, which is dinoi k'mimer. You know what happens? It's effective enough. All of the other brothers can do nothing because one brother did mimer. Which means that he gives mimer after he did this act after mimer was given by an older brother. So an older brother did mimer to her, to another co-wife. And then this mimer does bia, ain't a klum. Because then it's not mimer after mimer of gedolim. You understand? The gitoi, the chalitzosoi, also of a minor.
With her, right? Why would his mimer prevent that?
No, that's the whole point. That if the mimer gives her a get, well, how did we begin halacha aleph in this pedic? That if one brother gives a get, they ruined it for all the brothers, not from the minor. If the minor gives chalitza, it's nothing. The only koyach the minor has is that if he was the first one that did bia is like a minor. Like halacha yutas ketzah. Then active bia which is the same thing. Then take. If nothing happened prior to that, if prior to the minor doing bia or mimer, and then and he gave to her a mimer, even just a mimer or bia, nothing. If he gave the mimer is nothing. If he had a relation, when did he do bia? After Maimer Achiv Agadol, Sala ala Gadol. Like in the case where two Gedolim did Maimer Acha Maimer Kavashim Yarno. Let's continue to put more pieces of the puzzle together. Allah Chachav Ben Tisha Shana V'Yemechad that had bia. We just said it's like a Maimer. The Chazar Achiv Agadol Ba'aleha. Imagine. He had bia, and then the older brother had bia. Or the older brother did chalitza. Or nasan get. The older brother gave her a get. Or if the older brother gave a get, or if the older brother was boil, or if the older brother did any of the above to what Sarah had raised up even though he did an act of bia, they can't be together because the action of the adult will trump. Nifsalo Aleph Kedin Maimer Maimer. Allah Chafalov. Ben Tesha Shana V'Yemecha. Shabal Yivimtei. Okay, and then the higdil. But after he becomes an adult, get the chalitza mamish, like if an adult gave mimer. Oh,
wow. Then what's out?
Yeah, get maybe yosei, which is like a mimer, and the chalitza like we learned like little lizard. Shalei loine v'alabi asher koine kinyan gomer. But in ball mishigdil, oh gavaldik. Then that all you need is a get. Halacha chabes. Echad ben teshon and yemechad. The echad the nesrim shana that did not have two sa'aris, and on the other hand, the learner was sa'aris. Commercial biyano, but chila sa'aris will have a din of a minor. Good. Halacha chav gimel. Ketana sheru'uya limoin. Right. Remember that age, 6 to 10, or for sure older. And always a chareshes. That means that it's kedusha derabanan. Whenever kedusha is only derabanan. We don't consider them the same. It's two different types of kedusha derabanan. Ketana, the reason why Chazal said that the mother or the brother yesh la kedusha and kedesh la yinag b'adam minhag hefker, and the kedusha to loy not shetagba. But it's considered a more powerful kedusha because it's potentially going to become a bona fide kedusha. A chareshes biblically can never get married. Think on a suyin for not to be her pretty penuya, but she will never become. We don't know if she's going to become healed. The presumption is she won't. Lefikach, listen again. Im hoyu kol hayubamois habois mabayis echad. Either there are ketanois or chershois, all ketanois or all chershois. So a bia with one of them will patat all the other of them, just like when you have many co-wives. Yibum with one exempts the other. The Rambam is leading up to what happens if a guy leaves two co-wives, but one is a minor, one is deaf mute. Here, we're not going to say that bia with one resolve the other always. Now, because they're not married on the same level, even though they're both midrabanan. We tell the minor, you do miyun. What happens if she does miyun? She retroactively nullifies everything. All you have is the chereshes, and he will marry the chereshes. Now, if he emratza legarsha, kosev lo get achar sheyavay aleim b'hulta ledar, because as we learned, chereshes is mizgareshes beget. Halacha chafei. Hoysa achas pikachas v'achas chereshes, two co-wives, bias apikachas, or the chalitz of the pikachas will pretend as chereshes. But not reverse. Because similarly, if a guy leaves two co-wives, one is good, one is a ketana. Be a gedoylo, chalitzosa v'teres ketana, be'abs ketana v'teres gedoylo. Halacha chavav, hoyishtein ketanis, harois lemoyim, and the yavam has relation with one of them. Now it gets a little bit complicated. Uvachazar ubahu oyachiv alashniya. They're both ketanois. In other words, normally, what do we say, my friends? Ein achar bia klum. But here the ketanois. Avo malamdem es hashniya shetimon. Because since kedushin is toifish, she does it. The kaims that yivim teketana sheneval atchila. Allah chavzai.
Still, right?
Yes. No, it's ein achar bia klum is not said by ketans. That's the halacha chabav. Halacha chavzai. The chein adin bektana, guys. This is the longest share we have. The chein adin bektana v'chereshes. Sheba hayav tchila al ketana. V'chazer bohu alacha v'chereshes. Leipasal as ketana. And the chereshes needs a get. No, it's the second one is effective. Shebias haketana me'ula mebias hachereshes. We want the first one to stand. Shaktana roi lachazman. Lefikach, it's better for you to be mekayim dektana shenebalot chila. But in the reverse, what happens? At first, the yavam had a relation with the chadeshes, and then here pasal sachireshes. Pasal sachireshes.
The second relation,
because the second relation is more effective. Because since the katana will one day become an adult, it's a greater marriage. On that level of marriage, it's like that they're married.
Not only either of them are
fully, but that's the chiddush. Now, melamdem es haketana shetimoim. Guys, it can't be with the katana. Don't forget, because there was a bia chareshes. You get it? A chareshes yoytze beget. Why does he have to divorce the chareshes? Because he had a relation with the katana. Karech mekan v'karech mekan. Halacha chavtes. Choya achas pikachas v'achas chereshes. So yes, if he first has a relation with a pikachas, which means that's it, that ain't achar bia klum, and then ubahu oyachav al chereshes, it was an act of znus, but they possible as a pikachas. Now listen to this, guys. The chereshes tricha get.
Why?
I think because we don't want for a man to have a relation with the chereshes.
Remember, we said before, it's Tevis Midrabana.
Tevis Midrabana.
It's just a lot.
Since it's just a lot, Kedushim Tevis Midrabana. Thank you. Even though it's only a marriage Midrabanan, what's all you need to get? First. So normally we say in achar bia klum, not over here because she's a chereshes. So that act possible sachereshes. So hachereshes yoytze beget, and the pikachas should be given both a get and chalitza, because the relation with the deaf mute, the relation that he had in this case over here on the chereshes is strong enough to answer the relation with the pikachas. Very good.
It's like a partial.
It's something. Halacha, the final halacha lamed. Okay, they're both mentally competent, and first he has a relation with the gedola. Garnish. So ein achar bia klum. On the other hand, again, since kedushin is toifus on isur asay, that undoes the sin of the marriage. Same thing as we had on Lachavtes. So malamdim es hakatana shetimoin. And by the way, that's great because now the minor dissolves all the connection. So now there's no problem remaining with the adult. Because Shabi lost a kind of king in Gomor, Givaldi.
Thank you.
Because the Mion retroactively nullifies it.